All right, second lesson on John Watson looking at behaviorism. And he's heavily influenced in behaviorism by a Russian person, a Russian doctor named Ivan Pavlov. You may have heard of Pavlov's dogs. And interestingly, Pavlov wasn't even working with human beings. I mean, he's working with dogs, and he wasn't worried about behaviorism or some sort of actions and can you shape actions of dogs. He was actually worried about their salivation glands. And this was called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning. So it's like conditioning a dog to have a reaction based on a stimulus, something that like brings a reaction. So first off, he noticed Pavlov did that when dogs saw a bowl of food, they started salivating. And then somehow, almost by mistake, he noticed that like I can't remember, like you open a door up and they knew the food was coming, so they started salivating. So then he said, I wonder if I could just like ring a bell and then bring food every time. And then that would create the same reaction. And he did. He found out that like ringing a bell and then bringing food. And then when you remove the food, just ringing the bell was enough to make them salivate. So that's an involuntary response. But this got Watson thinking about the idea, could you train humans the same way? Could you manipulate humans in such a way and shape behavior in a positive direction for certain behaviors that you want to see, especially when it came to like children or people maybe even with special needs? And so this was known as classical conditioning. And there's a couple things here about classical conditioning you should know. One, there's some sort of stimulus, and a stimulus just means something that evokes a response. So you give a stimulus to someone, and you get some sort of response. And then classical conditioning, in the case of Pavlov, was when a neutral stimulus, like a bell, is paired and causes an involuntary response. Then there's another type of conditioning that's called operant conditioning, and that's when you're purposely giving like a reward for doing something to motivate the person that's shaping the behavior, or you're giving some sort of punishment where you're probably taking something away, and that's an attempt to shape behavior. So Watson was really interested in how well can you reward someone to do something or use punishment to shape someone's behavior as well. That's called operant conditioning. This is classical conditioning is Pavlov, like neutral stimulus paired with an involuntary response, like salivating, involuntary. And then extinction is if there's a behavior that you don't like and you're trying to get rid of it. And you're probably going to try to use operant conditioning, rewards and punishment, in order to do that. And that's when a response and behavior ends. That's called extinction. All right. One of the things that you should also understand about Watson is that his and there's the stimulus. There's the classical conditioning. There, you have just food. They salivate. You ring a bell. And then show food, and then you take the food away, and then when you ring a bell, they still salivate. That's classical conditioning. And then what I was going to say is that classical conditioning or behaviorism, I should say, is used with children, especially children that have trouble learning, specifically children on the autism spectrum. More on that. He maintained that external behavior that we can see it, so then we can predict it if we do certain things. And the reaction to a particular stimulus, rather than internal mental state, some sort of consciousness level, provided an insight into person's reactions. So if you notice that, like, well, every time so and so shows up, Sally starts to misbehave. Wait a second, so and so is some sort of stimulus, and that causes some sort of reaction. What is it about that person? What stimulus that's provided that causes that reaction? That says a lot more than the internal mental state, this consciousness thing, because I don't really know what's going on in the brain. We can't prove it. We can't see it. But like a stimulus, that's something that actually we can see, and we can see the behavior. So see, this is much more scientific because we can see I do this, I get that. And now if I change that stimulus, do I get a different behavior? And that's what Watson was all about. All right, cool. That summarizes Watson. You need to do the practice on him.